results started to emerge from the phenomenological reduction, I realized really what I was exploring here was deep change, which was easier to say and a lot shorter. So that's for pulling it now.
Oh, thank you.
So also as the results started to emerge, I was reminded and started to remember an experience that I had in my late 20s and realized in hindsight that that experience really was the beginning seeds that started moving me towards this project. So I'd like to summarize that experience for you. I was in my late 20s, I finished my MSW, and I was living in a very beautiful rural valley in Northern California. I had really good work, working with nonprofit organizations, had a good circle of friends, I owned my own home, but suddenly the world kind of flattened out for me, and I was experiencing a profound sense of meaninglessness and pointlessness, and there didn't seem to be any crisis that started this, and it was really an unusual experience for me, because I usually experience myself as pretty happy and productive, but this meaninglessness has just saturated my entire experience, and of course I tried to get out of it, I tried to change it, I tried to analyze it, and it was to no avail. But I was very lucky that there was a truly wise elder in my life at that time. And one day when I was yet again despairing over this experience, she made a deceptively simple question, but it was surprising to me. And she said, "Susan, you're in meaninglessness now. Check it out. What's it like? What do you notice?" Well, this was very startling to me because I'd been so busy trying to change the experience. I had no idea that this is something that could be inhabited, let alone explored. But she aroused some curiosity for me. So I came home the next day, plopped down on the couch, and thought, okay, here I am. What is this experience I'm calling meaninglessness? And so for at least a few minutes, I looked directly into that experience. And what I became aware of and noticed is that I could not imagine existing in the next moment. I didn't want to die. I simply could not imagine a next moment whatsoever. There was just nothing there. So I noticed that, and I want to read to you a little bit of what I wrote. By the way, I'm very grateful for the younger Susan who took the time to record this experience in my journal so that I can share some of it with you. I could hardly breathe. After all, one needs a next moment to breathe into. But breathe I did, and the moment I took my next breath, it was as if I had taken a step into nothingness. I recall the feeling, even to this day, stepping forward with no assurance that there was any ground to hold me. But then I found myself getting up to take a walk. I didn't decide to take a walk, I just moved without any forethought. I stepped out on the porch in the summer dusk, and in that step, I suddenly found myself in a different world. It was the same world as before, yet I was experiencing it in a totally different way. Everything was shimmering and intensified. Colors and sounds and fragrances had new dimensions, an abundant contrast to the flat and bleak world of a moment ago, a mere breath ago. I was inside this new depth, held by it, belonging intimately to it. And it was a world really of intimacy. There was a man watering his lawn across the street, and as though that water was coming through me, refreshing me. And all my senses were heightened. There was the colors and the fragrances were very, very vivid and intense, and I could hear people talking far away on their porches. I was held by it all, by a gentle and warm substance that infused the world, a world in which I belonged without question, without the need to question. I was no longer seeking meaning, nor was I feeling its absence. Meaning simply was everywhere, and I was inside it. I didn't have to find it or create it. It was larger than me, holding me. And so in retrospect, I realized that that was really when the seed was planted that moved me towards my research, my book, and ultimately brought me here today with you. But there was a real mystery there that I didn't understand, but I knew it had something to do with the fact that for a few minutes I had looked directly into that experience. So what I mean by deep change is the kind of change in which we enter a new depth, a new relationship between ourselves and our world. In other words, it's not horizontal, it's not additive. We don't just add a new job or a new experience or a new skill, although that might occur in deep change. But we change in some intrinsic way. And the real challenge of deep change, which I'm sure many of you have experienced, is that in order to enter into a new way of being, we first need to leave our familiar way of being in the world, our familiar identity, before we can know what's coming next. And that's the real challenge of deep change. So I think that you have a sheet on your lab, or you should, that has the 7 major experiential shifts of deep change. And it would be helpful to keep in mind that as we move through these steps, they represent a progressive letting go of what is known and familiar, and increased opening to what is unknown and unfamiliar. And these are the major experiential shifts of deep change, and there are many varieties within it in terms of length and duration and life context. Someone might be in deep change for a very long time. Someone can move through these shifts quickly. But keep in mind that these are the 7 experiential shifts when we cooperate with deep change. And we also don't move through them necessarily in a very linear, tidy way, and I'll relate to that as we go through the shifts. And some people never experience this deep change, and some experience it many times in their lives. So that's important to keep in mind as well. So I think, as most of you probably know, phenomenology means back to the experience itself. And so why that's important is because these shifts are descriptive. They're describing what we experience, what we are present to. They are not analytical, theoretical. It is not a model. They aren't steps. They're experiential shifts. And also, through the phenomenological method, it's not only the shifts that come into visibility, but the whole experience as a whole. In other words, the relationship of the shifts to one another. And that's very important. It's almost more important than the individual shifts, because you'll find that these shifts have a rhythm and a movement, and they move in and out of one another. And that's really key, is to start to grasp that. So to try to help us see that relationship of the whole, I am using some diagrams today. And the hazard of using the diagrams is that they look static and mechanistic and two-dimensional. But I'd like you to keep in mind that what we're trying to illustrate here is a multi-dimensional kind of presence, and we're showing the movement of our awareness as we move through each shift. So that's very important to keep in mind. And someday maybe I'll find somebody who can make me a video with them moving in and out of each other, but that hasn't happened yet. However, I've used these diagrams quite a bit in the past at presentations, and they have been useful, so please bear with me. Also, I want to tell you this material is breaking some new ground, and so I've had to employ some new phrases, some new uses of words, and I'll identify those as I move along. So one of the paradoxes of being human is that on one hand, we really desire to grow and change and become, and on the other hand, we like to stay comfortable, where things are the same and familiar. When we're not in the throes of deep change, those two are relatively equal. So there's kind of a homeostasis, they're relatively balanced. Okay, this is my first time using a PowerPoint, so. So this first diagram, I'm calling the